Hey, everybody. Good to have you with us. Jeff Mulitalo and Dan Chase here from Actualized Performance Solutions, here to talk about vision, one of the most common words we see in leadership discussions. Now, Jeff, I think a lot of people would say that this is something that has to be in discussions of leadership, and yet we're not so sure it's always productive for people to be intensely focused on vision. Why is that?
Yeah, I think and that's might be something that's surprising to talk about to folks because I think it's a generally held belief that if a leader doesn't have vision, like leadership doesn't exist. I think it's worth challenging though. I think we could have a pretty lengthy discussion about instances where leaders pursued vision and it was counterproductive, actually. It was counterproductive for the organization, it was counterproductive for its people, and it really served to do in the prospective leader. I think, but as we contextualize that, let's maybe start with, I'll throw a quote up here on the screen that is from Martin Luther King Jr., that one of my mentors really believed in. He always said this is what he considers to be the nexus of leadership. But if you want to move people, it has to be toward a vision that's positive for them. So vision that's positive for them, right? That taps important values, gets them something they desire so they feel inspired to follow. And yet, even with that logic, which that seems so straightforward, I mean, I don't know that I actually dispute that. But then the question is, why does vision create problems and traps for leaders? I mean, I don't know if you agree with that or not, or whether you have a different view.
No, I think, look, I agree with those that say vision is kind of the very essence of leadership. In fact, as we do these exercises that I talk about often, what's the difference between management and leadership? I would say without exception, maybe almost without exception. On the leadership side, people say the difference between leadership and management is this idea of vision. And I think that's good and that's natural. The problem is, I think often organizational leaders become they feel as if they're held hostage by the word vision. It's a little bit, I was reading something in HBR recently about innovation and this overwhelming word, we all got to innovate because that's one of the buzzwords of the day. Vision is a little bit like that in the idea that now that let's say I'm a newly appointed leader, someone who's in a position to act as a leader, and I don't have this grand vision. Right? And then the problem is one of two things. Either A, I'm like, well, I guess I'm not a leader, or the opposite is, well, I've got to be a leader, so I'm a leader, so I've got to have a vision. I'm going to manufacture one, and it's not organic. So we can accept Martin Luther King Jr. there because that's he's talking about organic vision. And that's good and that's useful, right? The problem is when it's one of those two extremes, either, well, I don't have one, and so I can't lead, or well, let me manufacture one here. Once you do that, I think you're in real trouble. That's why the word for us is purpose.
Well, let me just tell you, this might be the thing that maybe could be a little surprising, but I think if a lot of the folks watching or just think back on their experience in organizations, can you think of instances or how many times was the effort to create vision actually an indication of a leader who has an empty tank? Mm-hmm. This kind of manufacturing it for the sake of having it. Or in other words, well, I need to lead, I need to be effective in this role, and I don't have anything else inside of me as it relates to this, so what do? I conjure up a vision.
Yeah.
And I think the challenge for that's going to be, and the reason why it threatens leadership vitality and it produces pain points and undesirable effects for organizations, is that there's something to be said for that vision often has an implication of a grand scale. Uh-huh. And it's always troublesome when leaders aggrandize something that perhaps goes beyond its real scale.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then purpose is cleaner. Yeah. Because purpose is elastic enough to respond to the impurities that happen as you pursue it. It doesn't overstate itself, you know what I mean? And it just kind of lives and breathes, not only in like the cracks in the dirt, but it also is sufficient to set like your sights higher. And so I think in that way, if you were to make that pivot and kind of drop this notion of that vision is needed, you're probably better off.
Well, do you know how often, whether it's private sector, public sector, nonprofit, higher education, whatever it is, groups that I work with, when I ask them about their vision statements, They laugh, right? And say, how many of you work better or differently or whatever? In fact, most of the time, they can't recite it. And they laugh at kind of the flowery, hollow language, and that to me that is symptomatic of a manufactured vision. Well, let's see, we're an organization, and good organizations have visions, so let's come up with a vision statement. And that doesn't mean now what an organization or what a leader cannot have is a lack of purpose, but that's different, and the language changes the expectation for people. I think purpose statements, if organic and authentic, can be very useful, whereas vision statements that feel coerced or manufactured tend not to be. The other thing I would say to your point, Jeff, that I think is spot on is history, both national history as well as the history of organizations, are replete with examples of leaders that acted as stabilizers. And what I mean by that is they're coming off maybe a leader that was chaotic and there was a lot of turmoil, whatever, and their job is to kind of right the ship. Well, that's not really inspiring in a vision sense, but obviously required leadership, and they demonstrated leadership to do that, whether it's stabilizing a country, a government, an organization, a team, whatever else it might be. And I would certainly feel uncomfortable saying, well, but there's no real inspiring vision there, so they weren't acting as leaders. And so it's not that vision is bad, but it's got to be done authentically and organically. And if it's not there, that doesn't mean you don't have purpose. And that's where leaders become confused.
I love it, and I think that is really a danger and a trap in not only modern day organizations, but in terms of what consumers of civic leaders are looking for. They're convinced it's needed. And it creates this false sense of deprivation when really there's something to be said for the beauty of a clean purpose. And let me just say categorically, as I kind of throw just maybe a few final thoughts on this. I always get concerned if you've ever been in a strategic planning exercise or a vision building exercise, how a lot of times the question isn't, what is our purpose and what is our scope of opportunity, or what conflicts are there that prevent us from going as far as we'd like, to more just this, undiluted aspiration, almost which you can almost argue is fictional, that you start defining yourself absent of reality. And in some ways, really all that's going to do is it's going to deplete the creative energy of the people participating, but you're going to have to come back to those realities anyway.
Yeah.
And therein is a danger there. And I think its partner danger is when leaders lead in a certain organization and they pay the price, they do the hard work to identify a gap or an opportunity or a problem, get really clean on a statement, find the root cause and then solve it. And then when they go to the next organization, they don't do the same process, and they just believe the vision is the solution they've seen, which is a form of blindness and error that has captured and chewed up and spat out many a leader across multiple industries and institutions. Sometimes it's why private sector folks who have thrived in certain places struggle in higher education or government. It's not because they're not capable or because what they learned isn't useful. It's because they've defined it by a vision/solution, not by purpose, and what things get in the way of producing that purpose. It's cleaner, it will benefit your leadership efforts, and as we've talked about in previous videos, it will probably help you avoid the decisions or the paths that either lead to a version of compliance versus supportership. So
I would even say, or it reduces cynicism.
Yes.
There are a lot of people that are cynical about even this whole notion of leadership, and they're sick of the quotes and the books and that kind of stuff. It's because they've gone through that, and it creates cynicism. Is that fair?
I love it. And so I think to sum it up, I don't think, going back to this Martin Luther King quote, the thing I love about this statement is that it's not vision about you and I. It's a vision about that's better for others and taps into their values. This is a very concise statement. What we're talking about is the perversion of it. When we think by deprivation, we have to have some version of a vision, and it actually becomes about us. Purpose will help control for that and will inform the scale of your goals.
Yep, I agree. Well said. Thanks everybody for joining us. For more conversations like this, as well as materials that might help you make distinctions between real leadership and maybe that popular popcorn leadership that we see out there, please go to actualizesolutions.com, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.